Please listen carefully.
Hi, I'm Paul Frields.
And I'm Dave Guzman.
And welcome to Practical Bass. This is our first actual episode. Hopefully you had a chance to tune in for our episode 0, our Hello World episode, where we kind of introduced ourselves. If you'd like to know a little bit more about me or Dave, we encourage you to take a listen to that. If not, we're just going to jump right in with our first topic.
Sounds great. And that is, today we're going to talk about intonation.
Intonation.
Which may surprise some of you as a first opening podcast subject.
It is surprising. Why? So why did you pick this one, Dave? Because I thought it was a bold move, but I wanted you to talk about that.
It was a bold move. So the reason why we actually started with this one, look, in general, there's going to be a lot of things about our bass lives that are obscure, right? There's just so many different pieces that make up that final product, and but this is just one of them, and this is actually a big game changer, or at least it was for me. What's cool about this piece is that this was the point where I was actually meeting with you, and you were helping me out with setting up my bass, and we kind of went through all these different steps. And the very last step, of course, was adjusting intonation. So it was a super helpful session just for me to learn from you. But that last piece just changed so much for me, from my overall sound and feeling like I have control of it somewhat. That I thought, this is probably a great place for us to start. It's just somewhat ironic for me.
Yeah, and it gives the thing about intonation is it gives your instrument, it kind of breathes life and beauty into it. I mean, one of the things that I've found with when people buy, a cheaper instrument or a used instrument, they probably are happy, but sometimes they feel like there's like a little something missing.
Right.
And so often it's just those setup adjustments that can take that instrument from being like, a budget instrument to something that you can really live your bass life on and be really happy about it. Right. It's all in that setup. So yeah, I mean, I guess, when we talk about intonation, it's probably important to define what we're talking about. And what we mean is making your instrument in tune all the way up and down the fingerboard, right? You can think of it as like being in tune with itself. And another way to think about it is, if you want to be technical, what you're really doing is setting the length of the string that vibrates really, really precisely, or as precisely as you can, right? I mean, we're not talking about going and like engaging in robots to do this or something, but as much as you can with simply using a couple common tools and a decent tuner, you can really, really take your bass from being a good sounding instrument to being a great sounding instrument.
Yeah, and getting that bass to a point where it's like pleasurable.
Yeah,
there's always there was this mysticism for me of like, sometimes I would pick up somebody's bass and I just wanted to play it forever. Now, sometimes it's just the bass in general, right? Like there's so many different pieces to that. But this is just like a big piece it's a simple thing to take care of that will give you that joy.
Yeah, it really is. And you can do it yourself. I mean, don't let anybody make you think that you've got to take your instrument to a specialist to do this. And, really the only thing you need are the tools that probably came with your bass. And normally that is either the right-sized Allen wrench or a Phillips screwdriver. It depends on the kind of bass that you have and the kind of bridge that you have. But the operation really is all about setting that string length, and you can do that. You just need one of those tools and a good tuner. So the thing that I think you pointed out, Dave, that was so vital here is that this is part of a full setup, right? You can get your instrument in tune But generally, this is part of doing a full setup operation. We'll probably talk about other things about setup, I'm sure, as we go here on Practical Bass. But intonation is something where, I feel like that's kind of one of the most mystical, like least understood things. People will set their the truss rod,
string height.
Right,
Yep.
right. Like they'll do those things, but sometimes intonation is the thing that people leave off or they kind of forget about. But it's so vital. The way it works is really that strings have an octave harmonic. Now, hopefully people here know what a harmonic is. The easy way to do it, to do a harmonic is, you sort of touch on a particular position of the string without pushing it down to the fret like you normally do. You just sort of touch it and then you pluck the string or pick it and let off of the string with your left hand, like right after you do that. And if you are touching at one of the harmonic points on the string, you're going to get a high kind of chiming note is going to come out of that at that point.
It's a beautiful sound, actually.
Yeah, it is. It's gorgeous.
For bassists, we love that.
Oh, yeah. It's like, because it's a place that like takes your bass from being like the bass voice to like this beautiful angelic thing that's on top. It's amazing.
Great, yeah.
That was my little impression of an angel. Was that pretty good?
Yeah, that sounded just like a bass.
I am, like an angelic bass. But one of these magic points is at the octave, right? The octave or the 12th fret. So that is one of those magic points. And if you happen to touch, that at the 12th fret, again, not fretting the note, but like right on top of where the fret lies, and you pluck or pick and then you let off with your left hand, you're going to hear a chime, and it's going to be that note, like your G or your D or your A or your E or B or whatever note you happen to have on that particular string where it's tuned. And you're going to get a chime that's going to be an octave up from the open string.
Right.
And a lot of people will tune with those. The great thing about the octave harmonic is that because it is always, by definition, halfway down the vibrating string length, it is always going to be, perfect. It's going to be an octave above wherever the string is tuned. So if you've tuned the open string, right, you've tuned it well, and then you hit that octave, like that harmonic is always going to be exactly halfway down the string on that vibrating length.
Right.
And theoretically, right, that's exactly where the 12th fret should be as well.
That's right.
So that's the key, right? Theoretical.
Right.
But what are we, Dave? We are practical bass. Right. We are practical bass. So, yeah, and practically speaking, the manufacturers all, they're creating necks for their instruments that are machined very, very precisely, right, by computers and robotic bits that carve those frets exactly where they should be. Even on a handmade bass, right, the luthier is using very, very precise tools to make sure that the frets are carved exactly where they should be,
right,
mathematically speaking.
Right.
So, all that stuff is based on math and the scale length of the bass, and that way the frets end up exactly where they should be. Yeah. And so, again, theoretically, your 12th fret is right there exactly where the halfway down the vibrating string length, right, from the nut to the place where the string leaves the bridge saddle. Hopefully they're at the same place, but that's the key, right? As your bass has passed through, if it's a used bass, it's gone through different owners, it's gone through seasonal changes, different strings, right? And
it's been thrown in cars.
Been thrown downstairs. Smashed into stages. All of the things that happen.
Regular stuff,
Yeah, just, normal beat up your instrument kind of things. We're not abusers. We're not bass abusers here, but we know that some of you are, and that's okay. We do not judge here. But the point being that the vibrating length of that string may no longer be exactly at the ideal length anymore, right? And there's also a minor point to this as well, which is that the string size and weight, like the mass of the string and the diameter of the string, they also play a minor part in this as well.
Right.
Right? It's not something that you can like change strings and immediately know how to, like, oh, if I just tweak my intonation this much, it's going to be perfect again. Right? You have to.
No, there's no way. Yeah.
You have to
like,
check
treat
each one.
Right.
Right. And again, that harmonic will be in tune. If the open string is in tune, the harmonic should also be in tune. If that's not true, you may need to check your tuner, or you may need to get a better tuner, because like by definition, those pretty much have to agree. Practically speaking, there will be slight differences. And again, that's where the string mass and length come in, but they should be very, very, very close. Like close enough like that you should not, freak out about it. If you're using like one of those nice strobe tuners or something like that.
Yeah.
And you see a tiny, tiny difference, like, oh, it's holding steady for the open note, but it's moving very, very slightly for the harmonic. Don't freak out about it. Like, just, you get to the nice middle ground.
Yeah. And because when it's off. When it's off, it's off. You could see it's the needles in a way different direction.
Yeah.
And I started using, for my intonation, instead of just my regular tuner, I use like my interface, like what I use for recording. That it's just a much more solid sway, and it kind of gives me just a closer look at, just feeling like if I'm taking the time to get there, I might as well put like the best tuner that I have available.
Yeah.
For that task.
Yeah, it makes sense. I don't think we're saying that people have to go out and buy like, $200 or $500 tuners. There's a lot of great digital tuners out there. So for practical purposes, a decent tuner will work. I personally think tuning through the microphone of your iPhone or iPad or your Android phone or whatever, that may not be as accurate as a tuner that you plug in.
Right.
But there's a lot of tuners that you can get that you can plug in for like $20 or $40 that are really, really decent. There's some great pedals out there, like the I'm forgetting the name now, but it's the I think it's by TC, right? TC Electronics, the one that like they make a guitar tuner that will tune all your strings, like it'll show you the tuning of all your strings at once or something.
Yeah, it's the one. It's called a polychromatic tuner. That's my baby, and it's nice.
They're fantastic.
Yeah, and it will give you like the two different, like it'll either give you the view where it'll show you the note, or that it'll show you like what direction. You know, those two kind of different tuner views.
Yeah. I always loved the Korg, the small Korg tuners, like the TU tuners. I know they're not the most expensive things, but I always found like the way that their needle reacted was like it didn't twitch, like and make you kind of second guess yourself so much, which I kind of dig. But regardless, there are a ton of tuners out there, and so use a decent one. Just make sure that harmonic is tuned. The one thing I think that I would caution against are the kind of tuners that you clip onto your headstock, and they're not bad, right? Those can work in performance and so forth, but I don't find that they are quick enough or accurate enough to work for setting intonation.
Yeah. I think for this case, you want something that's directly
connected somehow. Yeah, I think we agree. So in any case, you hit that harmonic note, and then the next thing you do is actually fret at the octave, like, just normally as if you were playing. And I do believe that, it helps to have the bass in playing position when you do it, like not flat on a workbench, but, actually holding it in playing position, because the weight of the strings, there is some gravity kind of moving them downwards.
Yep.
Your neck
is,
Yeah. It sounds fiddly, you know what I mean? Like it sounds, I'm being so prissy about the tuning, but really, it does matter. Because that's where you're going to be holding it normally. So, might as well.
Just like any other aspect of your like setup, stuff should always be in that position, because that's where the bass lives.
Exactly. So, so you've checked the harmonic. And the next thing is that you fret at the octave, you play that normal fretted note. And if you do not find that that is in tune, right? If it's flat or sharp, you need to intonate, right? You need to intonate on that string. And what the intonation really is just moving the bridge saddle forward or backward. If the fretted note is flat, right? If you're fretting and that note is flat as opposed to where the harmonic was in tune, right? What it means is that the harmonic point is higher than that fret is. So what you need to do is move the saddle towards the nut, towards the head of the bass very slightly. That makes the vibrating length shorter so that you can get the fret in line with that harmonic point.
Right.
And then the opposite is true, right, as well. If your fretted note is sharp, you want to make the vibrating length just a little bit longer, move the saddle away from the nut so that now the fret and the harmonic point line up, right? This is like the easiest way that I know to check your intonation.
Yeah.
And like with any other setup thing, don't go crazy, right? Just tweak it a little bit at a time, and you get a feel like if you've moved the bridge saddle like a millimeter, check it again and see what you did. Like you don't want to like move it like a quarter inch. And
right. Yeah. I think a good starting place for anything like this is when you're first, if you're putting a screwdriver or an Allen wrench to your bass at all, just start with quarter turns.
Yeah.
Just 90 degrees, quarter turns, just, start there, just see what it does. If it doesn't do anything, you might end up having to go a half a turn or even a full turn. You want to make sure that you avoid anything extreme with your bass because I've mangled a bass or two.
One of the things I learned not too long ago is that, manufacturers, they use specific, screws with specific thread proportions on them so that they know like a quarter turn is moving the bridge saddle like a half a millimeter or something like that, or a quarter of a millimeter,
right?
Whatever. Like they know that a rotation on the thread has a specific length to it.
That's right. Yeah.
Which is amazing. Like that's amazing to me. That blew my mind when I found that out. But So
when you get here too, like I think when you start getting to the point where you're really looking at which way you're going to turn that Phillips or that Allen, based on whether it's sharp. Like there's a big picture of it, right? Because you're just shortening this string. So if you're shortening it, then it's going to sharpen a bit. So you can have the conceptual thing, or for me, even though I like to think of any of this stuff as conceptual, like at that level, there's literally no harm in just creating like a document. Like I have a Word document with notes, so I don't have to think of this stuff. So if I'm like just doing something quick, I pull up the document, I've made my notes, I've like taken the time to think beforehand. All right, if it's, if I do my intonation, if it's sharp, I turn it this way. And then it's foolproof, or maybe it just becomes natural, whatever the case is, but at least the notes are there.
Right, absolutely. And, another point here is just to make sure, after you make that adjustment, you always want to then retune the note, right? Because when you've done that, you will change the tuning of the strings. So, you make your little quarter turn or half turn or whatever adjustment, retune the note. So again, make sure that the open string and that harmonic at the octave are in tune again, and then check them. After you've done that, then check them against the fretted note again. So each time that you're doing this, you're retuning the note, making sure that it's as perfectly in tune as you can make it. Check it again, and then if you need to make another adjustment, do it. Retune the string, et cetera, et cetera.
Yep. A quick thing too that I've found also, like when you're doing any of like this specifically, like these bridge adjustments, depending on the type of bridge that you have, if it's just like that basic, generic, which I have, I've had and I've used just those generic bridges. Sometimes when you make the change, it doesn't actually move the bridge. So don't be afraid to like just with one hand sort of like lift up that string, like just tug on it a little bit and then push out the bridge with the other hand.
Yeah,
just kind of like get it snugged up in a position. Because if not, you can get it perfectly tuned in that position and then you get on stage and you start playing, and then the adjustment goes back into where it's supposed
moves like
and the saddle moves,
under you.
and that little bit makes a difference, and all of a sudden everything's back off.
And you know where that happens? I see that happen a lot, especially with like the vintage style or standard style.
That's
like
the one I'm talking
Fender
about.
Bridges,
Yeah.
right? Where the screws kind of like, there are screws that go down through the saddle for string height.
Right.
And they literally just sit right on the plate.
Yeah.
So you may, if you don't think that anything is happening as you're making these adjustments, you might even want to try like detuning the string completely, literally to where it's like, like flapping around, and then move the bridge with your finger and then tune right back up again.
Yeah, it's a good idea. Right.
Yeah. So, I mean, because those old bridges like that are, absolutely famous for that. Some of the modern bridges are like, they're kind of made to avoid some of those issues. But, even so, it never hurts to, just detune the string, fiddle with the bridge a second, just make sure it's in like a stable position and bring it back up to tune. Yeah, that's a super point. Having described this, I mean, it seems super fiddly. So, people probably want to know how often do they need to do it? Like how often do you tend to do an intonation?
After I discovered this thing that's been around for however many years, new to me, I think I've become, somewhat obsessed with it. So for me, I always joke around that I blame, like, if the sound's not right on my bass, I know it's my intonation. Like, it's got to be that.
It's the intonation.
It's usually not, but
It's
because
like,
of that,
you played an E flat instead of a D,
right?
And you're like, no, it's the intonation.
Right? It's just, don't worry about this, guys. I check at this point, like for me, I check it pretty regularly, but at least for me, I would say once a month, I'm actually looking at this because I play one bass and one bass only on all my gigs. So it gets all of the abuse. So once a month, more or less, I'm going in there. That might line up with the time that I'm changing my strings, but basically it's, I'm doing the full setup, but mostly to get to that point, which is like the end goal, to get that intonation right.
Yeah, yeah. And I think, from my standpoint, I will do usually a quick check, just about anytime I change strings, even if sometimes I'll do it just because, I pulled my instrument out. I haven't played this particular instrument for, a few weeks or a month or something. And I'll do a quick spot check. Like, I'll check that harmonic against the fretted note. Hey, does this sound decent? Is it like still in tune? And if I see that it is, I'm like, okay, great. Things are holding. That's fine. Nothing weird happened. Nothing shifted around on the bridge or whatnot.
Right.
But, each time I change strings, I'll do that. A lot of times when I'm changing strings, I'm using the exact same strings, like same gauge, same manufacturer, same everything. And, these things are really precisely engineered. So I don't find usually that I have to do it every time I change strings.
Yep.
But if I switch the kind of strings or the gauge of strings, I definitely do it then.
Right.
Another thing that I found is like a change of season can affect it, right? Because your neck on your bass is gonna, it's made of wood, and it's gonna, to some degree, expand or contract based on the season. It's usually not radical, like over the course of one night. I'm bringing my bass in from from my van to the gig or whatever, and it's cold outside. That's usually not such a big deal. Or, summer the same way. But when the average temperature, over many, many weeks starts to be very different, that can be an effect. So,
especially wherever you store your bass. I mean, and sometimes you just don't have choices. I mean, for me, like where I keep my instruments, or my bass room, my bass studio, is that part of the house is just cold. Yeah. And it is what it is. And
so, and maybe some people are in parts of the world where, they have a very steady climate, and, you may not have that problem, which is awesome. Like, I don't know, Hawaii or Bora Bora or any of those places that we want to go live and
rock and roll,
play bass for the rest of our lives. And I think maybe one last point about this is that, we've talked about like the way that we set intonation. If you find that you have to set your intonation a lot because you're finding that hey, I just reset this last week. I haven't changed strings and it's messed up again, right? And you're finding that all the time. I would probably recommend to have that bridge looked at, right? Because maybe there could be something wrong with it. Maybe like, the springs on the bridge screws are no longer, they're no longer springy.
Right.
I was looking for the word for springy. I couldn't come up with it.
It is springy.
Springy?
Yeah.
We can agree on that. Okay,
yeah.
It's springy. Yeah, I mean, it could be something like that. It could be something else with your bridge. We've tried to give you some tips, hopefully, for, manually checking that your adjustments are actually being felt by the bridge. But, if you're having to do this all the time, I would probably say maybe have that looked at by
start
an expert.
To look at other sources, or maybe in my case, it's just check your head. Maybe you're overthinking it. Maybe you're putting the blame on something that's not. It's not really the source.
You're like the psychotic intonator.
Yeah.
All right. Well, that's probably a good place for us to wind up with the psychotic intonator. That's awesome. So we will be back next time with another podcast covering a topic of practical knowledge for you, the working bassist. We hope you are enjoying this series. We are definitely open to your comments, your criticisms, your ideas for future topics. We want you to visit us on practicalbass.com, and we really want to connect with you. We don't want you to just, feel like we're feeding you stuff. We would love to hear back from you and have a relationship with you guys, our listeners.
Please.
Yeah, so drop us a comment there. You can get on the website, and at practicalbass.com, you can subscribe to the podcast there. We're out on iTunes, on Google Play, and we also have an RSS feed that you can catch in whatever podcatching app that you have. We are also on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, Google+, and we hope that you will, again, catch up with us, connect with us, and let us know what you think. And until next time, I'm Paul Frields.
I'm Dave Guzman.
And this has been Practical Bass.
Thanks for listening.